to Crypto Clothesline. We're glad to be here with you. Hanging out the crypto laundry. Getting all the crypto info for you. Crypto Clothesline. Crypto Clothesline.
Hello, Amy Rose.
Hi, how are you going?
Oh, I have got a sore head.
What do you mean?
Well, I've just got to tell you a little prelude to that story. I met a lady called Lee Blackie fairly recently at a networking event, and she has this business called Walk Safe, Look Safe, and I don't really know exactly what it is, but from what I can understand, on your mobile phone, if you install this app, it shows you where the road is and it shows you where things are. So you can be texting, and I think that like this image comes up on your phone saying, oh, you're about to walk into a pole. So last night I was coming home from an event, and you know about the event, and I'm not going to say too much more about it, but I was coming home and I was really upset. I felt really underwhelmed by the level of value that I got out of this event. And I was texting our Telegram group, and boom, I walked into a pole. I swear, I just boom, crash, walked straight into a pole. My glasses fell to the ground. Simultaneous emotions here, like anger. Oh my God, I just walked into a bloody pole. Embarrassment. God, who saw me just walk into a pole? And pain. Shit, that hurt. I've got this big nog on my forehead from where I am walking into a pole. And I'm saying to you, Lee Blackie, I think I need your app.
For the listeners, go back into the Telegram group, search for Ran Into a Pole. You'll see what happened with Abedi. But when Abedi posted that, I am pretty sure everybody was laughing pretty hysterically. And if I don't have something nice to say at the time, I don't say it. I couldn't actually say ha, 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 ha. And I'm pretty sure that everyone was in the same position because there was literally no response to Abedi saying, I just ran into a pole. And
it's the first time in a Telegram group that I've said something and there hasn't been like 1,000 contra or in agreement statements, because you've got your polls, haven't you, in those Telegram groups? You get your sort of naysayers and your full supporters with lots of love hearts and Tweety birds and things. There were no love hearts. There were no Tweety birds. I probably had a few Tweety birds flying around my head if you'd seen it in a comic strip. Oh, my Lord. Anyway.
No one wanted to say the wrong thing or be mean or,
No one wanted to acknowledge what a dick I was for walking along, texting with vehemence and banging my head on a bloody pole in a public place.
I'm glad there's an app coming that can protect you from the incoming poles in the future.
Thank you.
We've all had very embarrassing experiences though, haven't we? I mean, time and time again, I don't dive into pools anymore. Why would you? Because out comes your bits, and when you're in the ocean, you don't even realize that your top's off. You come walking out of the ocean and you're like, I'm nude. Like, I might as well be naked right now because everyone can see my boobs. Okay.
Yeah, that's definitely true. There's the odd moment that the odd nipple's gone flying and like, oh, rein her in, bring her back.
And it's actually really comfortable in the crypto communities. And that's probably why it was nice and silent for you. In other communities, Facebook groups and things like that, I think it's a bit different. But in our own Clothesline Telegram group, it's lovely in there. It's beautiful. And no one is going to dump shit on you.
It was in the Block Conscious group where everyone argues the toss all the time. It wasn't in our Clothesline group.
Okay, why did you do that? I don't even know. But at least it was the Block Conscious.
Because I got really poopy about the surveillance laws that weren't being discussed last night.
All right. Yeah, you were distracted by the oncoming polls.
I was very impassioned by the whole thing. However, we wanted to welcome you to Crypto Clothesline. Our show is about helping women not walk into poles and join the blockchain wealth revolution for themselves and for their families.
Our names are amy-rosegoodey and Abedi Catherine Pass, and we're speaking in blockchain and crypto and are on this mission.
Our mission is to not walk into any more polls while texting, vehemently arguing the point about surveillance issues in Australia. And we're learning together with you, polls or no polls. Talking with leading experts in the space, we're exploring cutting-edge technology projects that are shaping the future for our children, not to mention our foreheads.
And this podcast is to increase our intelligence and growth, and our values are for peace, harmony, and collaboration for the planet. So today we are interviewing Dr. Prash, and Dr. Prash is both a medical doctor and he's huge in the cryptocurrency and blockchain space. And he is the founder and CEO of Caleb and Brown. He's also on LinkedIn, calls himself libertarian. Abidi, what's a libertarian?
Well, I'm thinking liberty has to do with freedom, and libertarian must be some sort of freedom movement. I'm seeing it bandied around a lot, and I see it, and especially in the Bitcoin Cash circles. So I think it's around people, freedom of movement, freedom of, crypto, freedom from the control of the state, I reckon.
Okay.
We'll have to put a link in the show notes. I'll make a note.
Definition of libertarian, because I think even in the interview he talked about being a libertarian.
We met Prash at Block Conscious 2018 in Brisbane, hosted by Paul Seals. I didn't get to see Prash's talk, but I'm really interested to see the playback of it. The name of his presentation was Satoshis and Psychedelics, What They Have in Common. And he was in no way condoning use of psychedelics, but he was basically drawing some really interesting parallels between people's experimentation with psychedelics and the way that Satoshi was experimenting with basically breaking the mold of the finance structure. I mean, at least that's my take on it. Maybe without the maybe, I'm sure Prash would have far more eloquent explanation of the whole thing. But I thought that was a really striking thing to be speaking about.
And it also triggered our interest in Dr. Prash with respect to mental health. We became aware that this was actually something he was able to speak on. And the reason why we had him on the show is because we wanted to discuss with him what's happening in the day trading space with cryptocurrencies. And the mental health of these people, the relationships around these people are actually falling apart. And we wanted to pick Dr. Prash's brain.
There was an article that you found in sciencedirect.com, and I'm going to leave a link to that article in the notes. But it says this: trading and gambling appear to share some similarities. Indeed, traders can get professionally involved in high-risk types of trading as if it were gambling. This research explores whether excessive trading can be conceptualized as a subset of gambling disorders. And that's largely what we explored with Prash. The concept of whether somebody who's trading in order to make more money and better the situation for their families or their life, like how closely that can be assimilated with gambling and just not knowing when to stop or not being able to stop.
This is right. And there's actually a lot of articles that link the two. All trading, the rush that you get is very similar to gambling. And it is basically gambling. And I think people need to be aware that just because everyone's doing it and you're able to do it in a cafe with your laptop doesn't mean that it's okay to do all the time. It's impacting on families, it's impacting on kids. Literally, teenagers are out there day trading, not going to school. Yes, they're probably making some money, but is it worth it?
It also really reminded me of that series of interviews we did with CryptoGat, that sort of highly influential, let's call him a young guy. We talked about this with him as well, didn't we? About the fact that young people are getting drawn into this whole crypto market, and it looks so glamorous, and it looks so funky and so upbeat, but that it's really, really quite dangerous for young people because they don't necessarily understand the risks of, whacking a whole lot of money in there and potentially losing it and or not knowing when to stop.
Let's have a listen to the interview with Dr. Prash.
Yeah. Welcome, Dr. Prash, to the Crypto Clothesline.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. This is actually round 2 of our interview with Prash because the first time around we didn't manage to find the files. So we're doing it the second time, and it's an absolute pleasure to have you on again.
Thank you much. My father was an electrical engineer. Nothing electronic ever worked in our house. So seeing as we're all in the fintech business, I don't expect anything technological to work. Same will probably apply. I imagine.
I was wondering, it felt very Murphy-ish while we were all trying to connect.
Yeah, like one thing after the other. But we made it. Good work, team. Okay, so Dr. Prash, thank you so much. We're very grateful to have you here for the 4th time. But the reason why we have Dr. Prash here is because he's a medical doctor. And Abidi and I have been talking a lot about the mental issues with people who are addicted to trading cryptocurrencies. But before we get into that, Dr. Prash, can you please share with us what you're doing at the moment in the cryptocurrency and blockchain space and how you got there? And perhaps, this is a loaded question, 3 questions in one. How did you get from being a doctor to being in your current company?
Sure. I'll try and tie it all together
Thank
in
you.
one answer. So I'm a medical doctor. I work in the psychiatry department of a major metropolitan hospital. And I've always been quite involved within the libertarian movement here in Melbourne. And it was along those lines, I was writing a talk, 2014 or so, writing a talk that I was going to give about cognitive liberty. And it was a 3 a.m. Wikipedia sub type rabbit hole, stumbled across this concept of fiscal liberty, which isn't something I'd ever heard of before. Growing up or living in a first world democracy, I guess you live under the illusion that your money is yours and yours to spend. Until I read this article where it suddenly dawned on me that perhaps it wasn't entirely so. Perhaps I had been living under this delusion of freedom. Every libertarian would like to convince you of that, but that's another story. And that's how I first stumbled across Satoshi's white paper and read that till the wee hours of the morning. And perhaps it wasn't as dramatic as the world was never the same again, but over time, the world ceased to be the same again. And I started investing personally and then found a gap in the market in that back in those days, and to an extent now as well, there was just no way to buy large volumes of crypto safely and securely. You found yourself sending money to an exchange that was registered out of Russia with an operating address in Belarus and a bank account in Mongolia. And I'm not even making that up. That's the way it was. And that's how this all began in terms of starting this up as a means of allowing people to enter and exit the cryptocurrency market safely and securely with a sort of trusted Australian voice. So I started Caleb and Brown, which is a cryptocurrency brokerage, and I still run Caleb and Brown, which is from humble beginnings as we were. We're currently Australia's largest cryptocurrency brokerage in terms of client numbers and trading volume. And very briefly, the main idea of Caleb and Brown is that every client gets a personal broker and one who then takes you through the entire investing process from education to wallet setup to buys, sells, diversification, market analysis. We have an in-house accountant that does tax consultancy for our clients, helps them with setting up self-managed super funds if that's where they want to put their cryptocurrency into. And we allow for large volume purchases at a spot price and usually same day turnaround, which is a service that not many other people have access to. So that hopefully answers all 3 of your questions in one.
That was very good.
It sounds so good for people who are beginning in crypto and they don't really want to spend a year researching how it all works. They just want someone to go in there and do it for them. That's it in a nutshell. You guys teach them.
Hold on, to an extent. Yeah, if I was to divide it very broadly into the 2 main categories that we would service best, it would be the complete novice investor who wants to get in but finds a knowledge gap too large to bridge, where the personal broker takes him through the entire process. And the second broad demographic, I guess, would be the seasoned investor who is struggling to find a way to someone who wants to put in $300,000 into Bitcoin now, right now, today, and can't afford to wait the week or so that it may take to get on board with an exchange or send money across to an exchange and then have to deal with slippage and all those complications. That's something we're able to do sort of within the hour. So 2 large, quite distinctly different demographics, but both of them power value proposition services.
Wow.
Awesome.
And that's why we have you here, because you're on both sides. So you have expertise in both elements that we need answers to at the moment. And your medical opinion means a lot, particularly today. So I've been reading a fair bit about gambling and trading, and particularly the addiction side of it. Just some basic dot points is excessive trading is driven by an addictive process, and excessive traders are usually male high sensation seekers. So the people who would go skydiving every weekend because that's the only way that they can be happy in their life or something like that, that adrenaline thing. Can you tell us a little bit about your perspective on day traders and mental health?
Let me take you to the DSM. The DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. Essentially, it's the Bible of psychiatric diagnoses, which I have my objections to. It's been quite reductionist in terms of diagnoses, but it does provide a sort of framework of where things sit in terms of psychological classifications. Now, gambling addiction has been classified in the same category as all the other substance use disorders. So from an alcohol addiction to a heroin addiction and a gambling addiction is put in the same category. And the reason why it's been put in the same category is that, I guess, with advancements in neuroscience, understandings of biochemistry and neurological imaging, there has been an understanding that it's the same driver of addiction or a gambling addiction or any other sort of addiction in terms of the biochemical pathway that modulates this. And the main biochemical, I guess, neurotransmitter that's implicated is something called dopamine, which is maybe familiar to many of us. And it's that neurotransmitter that seems to be present and driving the addiction pathway. Again, whether it's a substance or whether it's gambling, it's that predisposition to requiring that rush that drives the dopamine pathway that people keep reinforcing by engaging in that activity. So if you're going to reduce that to demographics, yes, I guess the idea of someone you sort of stated who's male and requires a lot of excitement in their life, I mean, again, that might be pigeonholing it slightly, but I guess it does point you in the direction of what are the underlying predisposing factors. Well, that means that someone is more likely to develop such a habit.
If that's the case, and let's have a look. I know that in our last discussion, it was such a great interview, but never mind, we lost it. And I've said that twice now. In our last discussion, we talked about that crazy peak in December 17 when a lot of people were jumping on, and Layla Osborne, another one of our previous interviewees, commented on the fact that she knew people that would put themselves into thousands and thousands of dollars worth of credit card debt, mortgaging their homes, all sorts of things that people then lost when everything crashed back down. Would that be sort of a case of FOMO, or do you think that this sort of addictive gambling that we're talking about? When I say FOMO, like people jumping on because they're afraid of missing out, as in one-timers, or is that part of the addictive mentality?
I don't think we can reduce the entire phenomenon to being purely a result of an addictive behavior. But I think it certainly acted as a substrate. It was the food for anyone with such an addictive personality or an addiction to feed on. It was prime. So my assessment of what happened in December is that, yes, a lot of people got on purely because of FOMO. It was a lot of speculative investors. It was a lot of people who didn't understand the underlying psychology. It was people who weren't jumping on board because they believed that this was necessarily something for the future that they wanted to make their own, but rather it was people who were jumping on just for the pure sake of this is a quick buck to be made here. And the problem with investors such as that is that uneducated investors who jump on quickly on a whim are also the ones who are equally likely to jump out on a whim, which is what we saw with the big crash that followed. A proportion of those people are going to be most definitely those with an addiction of sorts, purely a gambling addiction or an addiction to gambling in the form of trading. It was prime, very ripe, fertile ground for someone like that to be sucked in. Gamblers will gamble on anything. There's a story of an illegal gambling ring that was busted, and when one of the guys was being taken off by the police car to the station, he remarked to the police officer that you'll never be able to stop us. It was raining at the time, and he pointed 2 raindrops in the window and said, I bet you that raindrop will get to the bottom before the other raindrop. Simplifying the idea that people will bet on anything. All you need to do is give them an opportunity. And that was as good an opportunity as you will find anywhere when you look at the kind of meteoric rise that we saw.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. It brings to mind, my kids on the trampoline. I bet I can do this. No, I bet I can do that.
Right.
I mean, it's basically drawn into the human condition, isn't it? It's like that competition element, that I can do it.
Yeah, it's exactly. It's competitiveness at an exponential scale.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Prash, there's 2 people now who I know who have suffered relationship breakdown because of the cryptocurrency trading addiction. And I have to call it addiction. I'm not a doctor. I can't actually, give that diagnosis.
Sure.
But from an outside perspective, they would spend 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And this is like normal for day traders. This is like a thing. And the family would lose out. Both times it was a father, but there's a lot of amazing female traders getting on board as well. So the mother role is being impacted heavily still. What's your advice to the families or even the day traders?
Yeah, I guess the first thing to look at is to understand trading behavior. There's excessive trading behavior, or involved trading behavior, then there's excessive trading behavior, and then there's an addiction. And how do you pointed out the fact that I'm not a doctor, but this certainly seems like an addiction. How do you actually discern where someone has a problem? And that's one of the hardest things to answer, because most of the time the person with the problem has absolutely no insight into the fact that they do have a problem. And usually they will live in denial. That's a very normal human response. We tend to find ways to justify our own behaviors, and the idea of cognitive dissonance lies very strong within all of us. And the possibility that an individual will identify this for themselves is very, very slim, and it often comes down to the family, for example, to identify this. But the line that can be drawn in the sand, I suppose, is, and psychiatry, where we start to identify something as a disorder versus not, is when it starts to impact the functionality of the person or the functionality of the people around them. For example, if it starts to impact on someone's health because they're sitting in front of a computer screen all day and haven't been out and seen the sun for 3 months, that's a good idea that it starts to impact functionality. If it's starting to impact on your relationships and starts to cause a breakdown, then it starts to impact on functionality. If you're having to sell your house or sell your car, that's starting to impact on your functionality. And those are just some of the trigger points, I guess, that could be pointed out as a reason why someone needs to go and seek help. They're relatively objective integers that can be pointed out to someone as a reason why they can go and seek help, because without that, it becomes very much a case of, well, he says, she says, or I think, you think. And that subjective argument, it makes it very hard to actually convince someone that perhaps they do need to seek help.
Prash, could you just break down for the audience, like I always like to reduce things to a bus stop conversation. You could have some pretty intelligent conversations at a bus stop, but can you break down what cognitive dissonance means?
I guess the idea of cognitive dissonance is that you're able to distance yourself from what your logic and reasoning may conventionally point you towards. You're able to distance yourself from because you're so blinded by your inherent bias.
So it's like you can't get out of your own way? Is it like you think you're right regardless of what everyone else is telling you?
And your bias will allow you to find a way to justify that to yourself no matter what.
Oh gosh, I think I've got that all the time. Does anyone else
we all
suffer
have
from
that. Absolutely all of us have that. It's a very inherent trait within the human condition.
Yeah, it's like...
And anyone who says no is probably reflecting their own cognitive dissonance right there.
I was like, I don't think it's my turn to do the dishes again, you know. We've been discussing males, and we also discussed the fact that, yes, women were onboarding this trading situation, but it's largely a male-dominated area in cryptocurrency in particular. Could you comment on any sort of connection between this angst or depression or difficulty as a result of this addiction, if we're going to call it that, and suicide rates amongst men?
That's a pretty multifaceted question. It's complicated by the fact that suicidality or the rates of completed suicides are inherently higher in men. If you look at the population prevalence, the rates of suicide attempts are much higher in women, but the rates of successful suicides, if you want to call it that, are much higher in men. So as it is, there's a distinctly elevated risk factor for men in terms of death by suicide. Then you take into consideration the fact that involvement in the cryptocurrency sphere is so skewed towards the male population. This is another discussion altogether, something that still boggles the mind for me. But most definitely, I think we can all agree that I don't know what the actual statistics are, but it's a very, very distinct skew towards men. Third factor to throw into this is that men, again, statistically are more likely to engage in risk-taking behavior. They are more likely to have a large risk appetite. And particularly with things like cryptocurrencies, with things like money, with things like finances, there often tends to be a sort of competitiveness that comes within men, where this need to excel in these particular areas that have been gender stereotyped to be an expression of success, particularly in the male sphere, can lead to the further factor that pushes people towards the limit when engaging in something like trading. So on all those three facets, you're going to see the skewed majority in the male population trending towards the potential of suicide as a result of an addiction to trading, which then goes wrong. As a gender, we've got the odds stacked up against us when it comes to this.
And also the fact that it's not just the males are more likely to be successful in a suicide attempt, but males are also, as you said, risk takers, but they've got apparently this desire to have, I don't know what the medical term for this is, and I mentioned it at the beginning, but what is this thrill-seeking mentality? I mean, women have it too, I get that, but what do you call that in a man where they want to go skydiving all the time and get that adrenaline and get that high from investing or those wins?
I don't know if there's a medical term for that, and to an extent that would be gender stereotyping. Even if we reduce it to the fact that only men like to go skydiving, for example. But
Yeah.
particularly when it comes to, again, things like money, again, I think we can look at gender roles in terms of men traditionally being defined by measures or metrics such as financial success. When you have a collection of the population that subscribes to the idea that that is the metric by which they should be defined or their success should be defined, then the chance that they're going to expend the energies towards that particular direction, their thrill, their dopamine release, that rush is going to come from being expended in that particular avenue is much, much higher. I guess if you're talking about skydiving, I wonder if we can reduce that to some sort of male hunter, go out there, engage in risky behavior so as to bring home the bacon in terms of hunting and being reduced to, so I'm just making extrapolations here
makes perfect
to try
sense.
and hypothesize. But yeah, I think there's a whole lot of gender stereotyping that is part of this, and not on behalf of the male community in itself who subscribes to this notion. This is something that's ingrained in the entire gender sort of almost from birth, and it's going to be a hard thing to eradicate. That's the underlying mentality that runs as a thread through us.
But also, Prash, I think if you look at certain spiritual traditions and things, like I certainly spent many years sort of enmeshed in the tantric scene, and in that situation they often talk about the fact that it was quite a contentious discussion. We were living in Italy at the time and attending these various meditations and what have you, and they were saying, but it is the female role, it is part of the absolute feminine to be, and I'm going to upset some women here, but bearing in mind gender stereotypes, but it's an absolute primal drive for the woman to be at home and protecting her children and creating that cozy feeling. And it's also part of that drive for men to be protective, to provide, for men to do with hunting, bring home the kill. That sort of stereotyping is also an evolutionary process.
That is, what you just said does resonate, because that's something that's inherent within particular cultural norms. And again, if you're talking about tantric philosophy, for example, and a lot of Oriental philosophy, that gender stereotype does run through. The idea of the divine feminine feeds into that larger ideal. Whether that's going to be the prevalent ideal moving forward, at least in a Western civilization, possibly not. The movement towards the gender non-binary, or an understanding and appreciation of the gender non-binary as being a more accurate reflection of the way we function as a society, has taken root far more in Western civilization, first of all, Western civilization, than it perhaps has in the Orient or in India or in parts of Asia. And as a society, we need to reflect to be able to pull a philosophy or a means of thought from a completely disconnected culture and try and fit that into a developing modern day society. It can lead to a bit of a disconnect. And we often see that when you're transitioning between generations, where there's that cultural shift that happens over generations. It can also happen with migration, where you have one cultural paradigm trying to be inserted into another modern day cultural paradigm. And so trying to bring that idea of man as a hunter-gatherer, woman as homemaker, a local example, into 21st century Australia that is becoming increasingly more progressive and moving towards a different way of thinking, I think that brings with it its inherent problems.
But it's also a discussion of this was something that I studied in a marketing course. I'm probably not going to get the parts of the brain right here, but the neocortex being the latest layer. Cortex is like corteccia, bark, isn't it? It's the latest layer of bark on the brain. But if you go right back into the primitive brain, marketers claim that we make a yes-no decision about a product or a service within 2 seconds. There's literally a 2-second gap in which our primal brain says yes, no, based on fear or foe. Are you my friend, or are you going to rip me off? And so I was also coming at it from that perspective, that marketing to women and copywriting for women is very different to marketing to men, because the marketing to men is the competitive sort of hunter-gatherer, if you like, not the gatherer, but the hunter bit. And marketing to women is about being part of a community, belonging, having other women take care of my babies while I leave the fold, because otherwise my line is not going to exist. My linear existence will be extinguished.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Yeah, that does run true. I can't deny that. I think this is one of those things that's going to evolve and become more clear with time. We went back 2 years, for example. Yes. We wouldn't necessarily be having this conversation to this depth, because this diversity of opinion didn't quite exist in quite that marked a way. 20, 50 years from now, this was going to be a very, very different discussion altogether. And hopefully we'll all be alive there to see it at that point.
Yeah.
Okay, Prash, bringing it back to trading.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Of course.
Let's get back to the intention, which is to try and bring awareness to a problem that is evolving in this cryptocurrency space where traders are becoming addicted. Basically, anyone can go on the internet at the moment, open up an account, and dabble on and on and on, people wagging school, not going to work because they actually feel like they're going to make more money trading. And yes, some people do, but they quit their jobs and say, I'm now a day trader. Basically, what's happening is there's some young people at the moment, and recently in a Brisbane school, they had people come in to talk to the students who were wagging school day trading, because it's a new form of like online gaming. It's sort of like taking on a fun and exciting experience, where they can succeed at something and share that with their friends. Back in my day, it was video gaming and stuff, but now they can actually make money out of buying a little bit of crypto and gambling. And I'm just wondering what we can do as a community to help support those people who are going to come in and they are going to get addicted. That's inevitable. How do we help these people and the families?
You're asking me to solve society's problems.
Yeah, just one of them.
Just one of them. If we're going to start with the reactive end of the spectrum, in terms of when you realize that a family member, a loved one, has a problem, the first step that I would consider is actually getting them to call a gambler's helpline, for example. There's services like Gamblers Anonymous. They are easily Googleable, it's a word now, links to gamblers' helplines. And really, we need to just be more aware that we should be considering this in exactly the same light as we would someone who's addicted to any other form of gambling. If a helpline seems too indirect, then go to your GP. Your GP is one of the best resources you will have. They are a highly underappreciated part of the medical community, and a good GP is like a life butler and worth their weight in gold. And going to your GP would be the first step to addressing this. To an extent, medicalizing it, enough criticisms of medicalizing anything, but medicalizing it can be of benefit in terms of it taking it away from being a moral judgment, taking it away from being an ethical conundrum. And if you take it away from being a judgment call on the person and to bring it down to being an actual medical problem with a physiological, biochemical abnormality that we can point to, that could be one way of engaging that person towards trying to seek help. That in itself can be quite an effective strategy, rather than the usual sort of finger pointing and blame gaming that comes with seeing someone as doing a bad thing, as opposed to someone who has a disorder, someone who has an illness and a condition that needs to be treated and that can be treated. So that's the sort of reactive answer. We try and look at things that we can do to prevent this from even becoming a problem, which is obviously ideal. That becomes a lot harder, and primarily because so much of this can happen without you even being alerted to it publicly, right? Kids or teenagers or adults can sit in the privacy of their own rooms, they can sit in their offices, they can sit anywhere, and it's not like they have to go down to the pokies or they have to be out of the house. They can be very comfortably in their own room, apparently studying or apparently working, and masquerade tends to make these things quite hard to pick out. So I don't have an immediate answer of how families can get a sense that someone needs help. But without stating the obvious, I guess the idea is that if you start to see unusual things on your credit card, or if you start to see your bank account dwindling, or if your husband hasn't shaved in a while and seems to be getting paler because of the amount of time he's sitting in front of his computer screen and becoming vitamin D deficient, perhaps just ask him a few questions about how the cryptocurrency market is going. And perhaps if there's one thing, I'm sort of clutching at straws in terms of what I can offer that's productive here, but blame never helps. Anything accusatory never, ever helps, because it puts people on the back foot entirely, and it just changes the aura of the entire conversation. And it's hard for someone to see you as supportive if you started off by coming across as being accusatory. Instead, if you can be part of their problem rather than being on the other side of the problem, you're much more likely to have a chance to engage them than if you came across as an adversary.
Right.
Prash, you said last interview that you would be willing to, if we assisted, to provide in the next bull run a support network or a messaging system or some way that anyone affected by or involved in cryptocurrency trading could contact us and we could offer some support. Would you still be happy to do that?
I never said that. How preposterous.
Politician.
No, I'm not taking any hints from our leadership. No, I'd like to say yes. I certainly think That's something that needs to exist. It's something that would be the responsible thing to have exist. And fortunately, unfortunately, I guess I am in that prime position of being the person who should take a stand towards establishing something like that. I'm mindful of the amount of work that will entail, but it's something I'm very happy to publicly commit to. I will spend some time looking into who I can scaffold around me towards establishing something like this, whether that's training up psychologists, psychiatrists, or counselors towards providing a sort of service that could even be partnering up with a gambler's helpline to provide a bit more industry-specific education to them so that they're better equipped to cope with a potential similar influx. And having both of you on board, you're
Yes.
joining me under the bus here, having both of you on board to help spread the word and help spread the message of the need for such a service to exist, I think that's definitely something I'd like to commit to and something that can be worked towards and would be particularly important in the next bull run.
Let's do it.
Even perhaps a Telegram profile that is available that we can all man for questions to come in and
Or woman.
or woman, yeah, that we can all woman, yeah.
Speaking of binary equality or whatever the saying is, yeah.
Yeah, I think I really love the idea because the community is so small. We have an opportunity to help solve a problem at the very beginning stages before it just gets silly. So partnering with a gambling helpline, that would be amazing. I'm not even sure how many of those exist. I think they'll benefit from cryptocurrency education anyway.
I think they will most definitely. Yes, that's something we can start investigating.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Prash, for coming on the show.
My absolute pleasure. We can do this the 5th and 6th time.
Lovely. Thank you so much. It's always such a pleasure to have these conversations, and they often just meander off into the craziest places, but they come back again.
Alrighty.
Thanks, Dr. Prash. Speak soon and
Have a
we'll
lovely
keep
day.
everyone notified of the developments in the helpline.
Yes. Alrighty then.
See you.
Cheers.
Bye.
So that was a very interesting discussion. We went right through the layers of the brain, except I can never remember them when I'm talking to really clever people, so I have to use a long sentence instead of just one word. But anyway, I got the point across.
What we actually established in the interview was that together with Dr. Prash or Crypto Clothesline and Caleb and Brown, we're going to build something that can support people who have problems with day trading, gambling, and cryptocurrencies addiction.
It's a kind of a sobering thought, isn't it? A, that somebody, is going to need that kind of help and that there are people in the culture definitely who are experiencing that pain. But B, that there's even more work for us to do.
Well, there is, but I think more hands make lighter work. People listening to the podcast, I've got 6 signs to let you know if you're addicted to investing. The first one, and I'll try and be really, really quick. Abidi, I think you've got some of these as well if you want to talk about them. But the first one is having a myopic vision, and Abidi and I discussed the term myopic, but basically the only vision is to make money, and you need to make money, and you need to make money now, and that's a very small mindset when it comes to investing. And then if you have a broader long-term investment plan, that's a safer and more healthy approach to trading. So if you can see that your only desire is to make money and make money now, and you can't see into the future really, then that's a bit of a sign that things aren't quite right.
Yeah, myopic is the short term, isn't it? So the second one here says getting a big high off investment wins. And I guess that's all of us really, but it's when you are absolutely addicted to that adrenaline rush and you cannot give up the idea that you're going to win. You've almost become like a junkie, addicted to that feeling that this next one is going to do it. And you do bigger and bigger bets and take greater and greater risks to get that rush again and again.
Yeah, so just like adrenaline junkie.
Exactly.
And then it's the amount of time. Because the cryptocurrency market is 24/7, it's very easy for people to stay up for like days. And also not even eat sometimes, or just eat a lot of junk and just stay up there and just watch those charts. So someone who's spending more than 12 hours a day in front of a screen usually has a bit of a problem and needs to get that checked. I don't really know how you can support someone in this position. Obviously, that's why the helpline, I think, is going to be a really good tool. But that's one of the things, the amount of time.
I think helping someone in this position starts with connection. Prash talked about it not being a blame game. So he talked about sort of having that conversation like, oh, what's happening with the crypto markets and what's the deal with this? So you're getting an inroad into their thinking as opposed to trying to change what they're doing as a first step. And connection, like a human conversation, if you can actually get them off the screen and talking, as they say in Italian, ai quattro occhi, four eyes looking at each other is a big change. Another one that is part of the list that you found was an obsession with stocks and investments. So it's one thing to be interested in the market. It's another thing to not be able to talk about anything else or to think about anything else and to be constantly researching. And I don't know about you, Amy Rose, but I think there's quite a few of those types of people on our Telegram group. Do you agree?
There is, and it gets justified when people are in a group and everyone's doing the same thing, which is a bit different to gamblers and all the other people with an illness around this thing, because it's not like gamblers get together on a Telegram group and boost each other up saying, this is amazing, let's keep doing this over and over again. People are actually encouraging it within the community, and there is a culture evolving.
It's almost like there is a support of that kind of activity. There's like a yes feeling within the group that, oh my gosh, this person knows a lot about it. And it's not to say we shouldn't be doing research, but are we having those healthy walks in the sunshine? Are we having time with our family? Did we go out and remember to have some fun last night or to see a movie? Or are we still checking via the apps when we go to the toilets at the cinema what's happening with my crypto portfolio?
Yeah, and another thing is hiding what you're doing. And this goes with like anything. If you've got to hide it from the people who love you, then you might have a little bit of a problem. So if you're sneaking around, like Abidi said, going to the toilet to check on your app, you might have to slow down a little bit.
And that's an interesting one too, because I know for the first little while that I was in crypto that I didn't tell my partner about it. I was definitely sneaking around. I wouldn't say hiding because we spend physically a lot of hours separated because he works away, but I didn't necessarily bring it into the family conversation either, I've got to say, because he was so dead not interested, like absolutely doesn't want to know about it. When there was a one-way street or a dead end or a no-through road, then half the time I went, okay, I'll just continue doing this on my own, but I'm not going to bring it into the family conversation because I'm meeting with cold pricklies. So I guess, yeah, everything within reason.
And how lucky is it that you talked to him? Because number 6 on this list is ruining relationships. If the removal of trust and the connection is no longer there because your attention is elsewhere 24/7, then that's a telltale sign as well. So if you're constantly trading, neglecting everybody else around you, that's going to ruin relationships. And you really have to find some support.
Absolutely, because it's just about like looking at these various points and just going, does that ring an alarm bell in me? Or that totally doesn't sound like me. If there's the smallest sort of alarm bell going off, just look into it a little bit more deeply, because there's nothing like self-reflection to let you know that there are things that need some adjusting.
Your partner's going to be genuinely worried about you. No one is worried about you to attack you. They genuinely want to help you. Perhaps just take some time to hear what they have to say, because you don't want to be left all alone with just your crypto, because it takes more than that to make the world go round.
It takes more than that to have some fun, that's for sure.
And that's depressing. Let's spruce this up and talk about poles. Just missed that one.
It gives a whole new light to pole dancing. Wah, 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 wah.
When you ran into the pole, did you fall?
I didn't fall. I just blasphemed.
Did you?
Very loudly, at the same time as gazing around both for my glasses and wondering who had seen me do it, because it was very loud. It was an audio experience as well as being an implosion in my brain.
Did anyone see you?
I hope not. I don't know. You know, when you shuffle off in total embarrassment, you're just like, oh, I'm just getting out of here. I felt like a little old lady that fell into the pole again.
Oh my God. It's just so funny. It's awesome. And I'm so glad that you're brave enough to tell everyone about it.
Well, I think it's time for Ask the Girls segment.
Oh, here we go.
So I think that we have another question this week from Nick Hollins, a podcaster as well, and he has Decentralized podcast. And he has written, and I think it might be quite relevant to what we're speaking about. He has written, some smart and influential people are calling the bottom of the market right now. If that's true, how can people be ready for a new bull market? Well, let's translate that first. What's a bull market?
Oh, it's going up, 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 up. Just imagine that there's a red flag up on the top of a mountain, and then there's a bull, and all it wants to do is get right up to that red flag, and it's got like heaps of Bitcoin following it.
It's got Bitcoin impaled on its horns.
Yeah. Anyway, the market's going up.
Can we define what smart and influential people mean? Because they're not necessarily the same thing.
They're not. I can't comment because I don't want to mention any names. But there's influencers out there, and I don't quite know why they're influencers, but they are. So kudos to them. They've got a following. But how do they know? And do you know what? How does anyone know? No one knows. Or perhaps the people who are the whales, if all the whales got together and said, let's have some fun this Christmas Day, or something.
Yeah, I mean, somebody must know somebody, that interview with CryptoGat. There are definitely people that know when they're about to play havoc with the market. But recently, in some Twitter chats I was watching, and this poor woman was copping a beating. And this other person said to her, well, why should I follow you? Why should I endorse you as one of the top 10 women in crypto or whatever the silly competition was? Because all you do is go around and take selfies at big famous events with you pouting into the camera. And I was like,
oh, I saw that. I know who you're talking about.
That was like, whoa, you need these girls. I mean, I also saw another quote saying, being in crypto, you have to have balls of steel. And I thought that was really funny. And somebody else said, that's so sexist. I must be sexist, but I just thought it was really funny. And I thought, gosh, these women have got balls of steel, the way they speak to each other. So where are we going with that? Smart and influential people. Yeah. Question marking that one. However, the bottom of the market right now, so that's basically implying that Bitcoin, who's the grandpappy, who takes the lead and all the other coins follow, is at the cheapest it can be. I haven't looked at the markets in terms of historical movement, but people, including Lynn Ulbricht that we spoke to today, said it's been hanging around the $6,000 mark for quite some time now. So I couldn't really comment on whether I think it's going to go much lower or not. Who's holding it there? That's my question. Who's keeping it there?
Okay. So is he saying, how do we prepare for this?
The question is, some smart and influential people are calling the bottom of the market right now. If that's true, how can people be ready for a new bull market? Well, I think like you buy your straw hats in winter, don't you? If it's so cheap now, then not that we're making financial claims nor advice, but, I think it's bargain basement time.
Okay. I really don't want to give any financial advice.
No.
But what I have heard is that it will go way lower than this. In fact, I know people who are educated, who aren't influencers, but who refuse to enter the market because they've been following it for a very, very long time, and they know, or they believe that they know, that it's going to go almost to zero at a certain time. So there's two sides that, some people are saying this is a low. Some people are saying, Jesus, it's going to go way lower than this. And I'm waiting until that point before I buy. So that's what some people are saying. So there will be another bull run, and that's inevitable, isn't it?
I think it's inevitable. I think it is. We see it on the other markets. And I think the other thing that's worth mentioning here are the cycles in the markets. And in the cryptocurrency world, it doesn't feel like we've established necessarily a predictable cycle. But in other markets, I think, don't they say there's like a 10-year cycle in real estate markets? And when we see markets that are so heavily manipulated, like precious metals and cryptocurrencies, it's hard to know at which point of the cycle we're in. But I know that people who do understand trading and have gone deeply into that, they are able to comment on that much more eloquently than I. Well, thank you very much for coming, and I shall see you next week. And I'm so excited because you're flying to Perth tomorrow.
I'm really excited about it too. I should probably pack.
Yes, do that, and I shall see you in the next 48 hours.
See you later, BD.
Lots of love. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Hi, you've called a BT.
And Amy Rose.
At Crypto.
Clothesline.
Leave a message after the
beep. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Ready?
It's all very fine and dandy that you think that women should be included in this crypto and blockchain information. I just think that you might be a little mistaken again. Frankly, I don't think women care about this stuff, and we've got more important things to be thinking about. I mean, women's proper role is is taking care of washing and making sure that the clothes are folded and the floors are clean. I would hate to imagine the state of your homes. I can only think that if you ladies think that you're modern women, that somehow you think you're above all those simple womanly tasks. I would very much appreciate you ladies just giving up the ghost on this whole bring women to the front rubbish.
Crypto Clothesline.